So if you've spent any amount of time around Civic Nebraska or joined us for any of these webinars, we have 4 indicators of civic health that we focus on. And civic health, as we define it, is really just how people get involved in their community to make things happen. How people get together to make connections, how they get involved, and how they participate in their government and in their community. And so one of the themes that came up as being really important was civic education, starting early, and that civic education and teaching the next generation, how we be involved in community and why it's important is a task for all teachers and mentors and coaches, regardless of discipline. It's not just for one required semester, your senior year. So really excited for this discussion. A couple of quick data pieces that I wanted to highlight before we get started, just to frame our conversation. I'm going to focus mainly on community engagement and political involvement. So here's some community engagement numbers from our Civic Health Index in 2020. The data is a little bit older than that, as you can see, but Nebraska does pretty well in some of these indicators, like volunteering, working with neighbors towards something positive, and group membership. But you can see some of them, like attending a public meeting, even though we rank 13th in the country, still only less than 14% of people said that they attended a public meeting in the last year. There's more people that volunteer and work with neighbors towards something positive. So that's great. And you can see on the right, most of those are increasing except for group membership. So participation in some kind of a civic group, that's decreasing in Nebraska as well as across the country. There's a lot of indicators for political involvement. Few that I wanted to touch on, with civil discourse being such a hot topic right now in this climate that we're in. I'm discussing politics with family and friends frequently, about 40% for Nebraska, discussing politics with neighbors frequently, a lot less, only about 9% of people are discussing politics with people outside of their friends and family. Pretty good at reading, watching, listening to news. And then contacting, visiting a public official, that's about 16%, which is higher than the US, but also increasing. So, and we know that voter participation increased quite a bit this last year, but we still have a lag in participation among younger people. So, so one of the questions that we are going to focus on with all of this is, how do we prepare students that, even if they don't go on to higher education, that are opportunities and that their preparation, they can be ready to participate in our communities and that we have opportunities for them to do so. And so I'm excited to hear what our panelists have to say. We've already introduced them. So at this point, we'll just jump into the discussion. So first of all, our first question is just to share a little bit about yourself, and interested in your answer to that first question that we posed to the group. How would you describe your aspirations for civic readiness for your students? So I think if I could start with Ebony, if you'd be willing to kick us off, and then we'll get more and more local as we go. So.
All right. So yes, again, Ebony McKiver, the Social Studies Education Specialist for the Nebraska Department of Education, which essentially means that I have my hand in social studies and civic education across the state, providing guidance, standards, assessments, all that good stuff. But my aspirations, I guess, for civic readiness and how I would define it, I think it's really influenced by 3 factors. And I think it's knowledge, political knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors. And I like to think that the knowledge that we're able to provide for students in schools then influences their attitude and their feelings about civic engagement, which then, falls into the last category of civic behavior. And when I think about having students participate in civic engagement or their civic behavior and participating as they grow older, we always like to fall back on voting, but I think it's a much more broad category in how we talk about what civic engagement looks like, right? So it looks like the Civic Health Index really showed that accurately. It looks like the connectedness between community members. It looks like picking up trash in your neighborhood. It looks like watching the news. And I think once we start to communicate that, we have a much better, I think, measure of how actively engaged our students are and they will become. And then I like to point out the last point, and Lori kind of talked on it too, this idea of civil discourse and being able to, have those conversations with our students and understanding that we may not agree, but I think we also come into this with wanting to do what's best for our communities, for our state, for our country. And because we disagree, it doesn't make us anti-Nebraskan or anti-American. It actually makes us, what the founders were hoping that we would be, a country of ideas and thoughts that we can kind of come together and compromise to really, promote and the success of our country. So I'll be quiet now.
Great, thanks, Ebony. Lori, I'd like to go to you next. From your regional perspective and experience, how would you define civic readiness?
So Ebony stole my line because she's got the Nebraska Department of Education, and I love that part of that whole idea of you have to have the knowledge. You have to be participant. And so as we were writing the Nebraska state standards, specifically in civics, we went with a twofold standard. So the first part is you have to have civic knowledge, and the second part, you have to participate. So if you look at those standards very carefully, they were very well designed. I believe they were well designed because I was one of the authors, but it was very intentional that we did that two-part approach. You have to have both of those or you're not civically ready. So that's me.
Thank you. Lacey, we'll go to you next. If you could introduce yourself again, just briefly, and then your definition, please.
So Lacey Glasford, I am a social studies teacher at Nebraska City High School. I teach 11th graders, mostly civics, and this is my 16th year. And I have to say that my aspirations, we always, as secondary teachers, we tease that adolescents are very emotional. They don't know how to control their emotions. But in today's political atmosphere, I think that's more adults. And so by going over the standards that Ebony and Lori actually covered, I think it's our job to create an environment where kids can actually have meaningful discussions using facts, knowing where the facts are, and coexisting in a world where politics can get really divisive, that we can agree to disagree and we can still love each other regardless of how we feel about certain political issues.
Great, thanks. And lastly, Elizabeth, you have a little bit different perspective. You're not necessarily a civics or a social studies teacher, come at it from more of the earth sciences. So I'd be, how would you define what would be your aspirations for civic readiness for your students?
Well, and I did notice, it doesn't matter, but my information said earth science and STEM fellow or ambassador, which I did do that for a really long time, but I have been in the social studies classroom for 3 or 4 years. But I'm also a different perspective from Lacey in that I'm elementary trained. And I think that while that training happened a long time ago, I've always been really big in bringing everything into my classroom. Whether I'm teaching science or social studies, I'm always looking at all the other classes as well. And so thinking about it from a younger student's perspective, Lacey's kids are getting close to voting age. It's when your government teacher takes you to the courthouse and you're registered to vote. I mean, I remember doing that when I was in high school, but my kids are younger. And so 6th graders are around 11 years old. And I guess my thing that I think I need I like to build on is just being part of a community. Yes, those are young social studies standards. They're doing that at like kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. Yes, this is where you live, but what are you going to do about it? How are you going to make it a better place? And how are you going to be involved? And so I'm involved with our community foundation and the youth advisory council part of that. I don't lead that, but my kids have applied for a grant to do a community project. And I think one of my biggest benefits in my classroom is reaching out to those, to our stakeholders in our community, to show the kids that people, that the community cares about them and they have a voice, and how we're going to work together. So.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. And you've already started to answer the next question I had, which is, what are you doing to build civic readiness in your students? Any emerging models or tools or activities that you're doing? Anything else that you'd like to add?
Do you want me just to start?
Sure.
Right there. Okay.
Great.
I'll let Lacey and Taylor, maybe whoever, talk about the Nat Geo program. While I help with that, I won't be implementing it in my classroom. I would say that the stuff I do in my classroom is it's not always just in my social studies classroom. It's more in, like, we have enrichments and things like that. So we have a little bit different opportunity here at the middle school to maybe pop some stuff in that I think is really fun and exciting, whether that be our kid applied grant and built pollinator garden with our community foundation, or our house system. We have a house system kind of like Harry Potter here at the middle school, and my house is service. So how do I get my students involved with service opportunities? I guess it's always just reaching out and looking for somebody who maybe needs some help or a great partnership. Having access to community resources is super important. So.
Thanks. Lacey, I'll go to you next.
Okay. Well, if I could actually have Taylor chime in here for a moment, because he's the one that I'm mainly working with. But yeah, so Nebraska City High School is going to be piloting a program where we're going to be collaborating with National Geographic and Taylor Hamblin from the University of Nebraska. And we're going to be taking information from our science classes, or a science class here at the high school, where we're going to be analyzing composition of water, if there are any pollutants in the water. We're going to be looking at some lakes around Nebraska and how that's actually really impacting our local communities. Taylor, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, sure. So hi again, I'm Taylor Hamblin from UNL. Yeah, it's going to be an amazing program for a lot of reasons. Probably the one that's my favorite is all the students will be doing their own research. And so in the science classroom, students are going to go out into lakes and streams. They're going to collect their own data, what they learned from their science teacher. And not just, one time. There's about 5 or 6 different experiments they're going to be doing. And all that data comes back into the classroom and is paired with other data that the state of Nebraska has, and along with some academic circles. And the students are going to learn how to interpret that data and basically figure out, like, what's going on with the water, what's polluting it, what's leading to these, poisonous algae that you might hear about in the newspapers, or what's leading to, like, our lakes disappearing. And based off that data, students then get to come into Lacey's room and determine, they already will have the problem figured out, but they'll determine, like, what the solution is. And so, based on, like, what's actually polluting the water, they'll figure out what the source of that pollutant is and figure out why is it happening. And then based off that, determining the problem, the solution, they will then come up with a political answer. So should we have an informational campaign? Should we write some legislators? Should we try to present at something? What should we do? Like, how is this going to fix the problem? And, Lacey will be once a week, twice a week, helping those students understand the different actions they can commit to, how to do the research, how to basically work and collaborate. And then at the end, they'll pull the trigger on it. They will then go ahead and do their civic action based off all this research they do throughout the semester. It's gonna be a really fun program.
That sounds awesome. Thanks for sharing about that. Ebony, I'd like to go to you next. What other innovative resources or models or tools, either around the state or from your perspective of what the Department of Education also can offer as far as support?
Sure. So Absolutely. So speaking from the Department of Education standpoint or viewpoint, obviously there's, state statutes and policies. And so there's State Statute 79724 that says for students to graduate high school, they need to take part in one of three activities. One is participate in a public body and then develop a project based on that participation. The second one is students can research a holiday, and the specific holidays are mentioned in the state statute, and then they can create a project based on that. And then the last one is to take the naturalization test in its entirety, all 100 questions, and then pass that. And then there are other, policies that we have through the Department of Education, and we look at some of like the AQuest tenets, and AQuest looks at the performance of schools. And through one of those, the tenet is to measure if students are civically ready when they go and graduate from high school. And then there are, of course, working with Lacey and Taylor, the ability, and Elizabeth to, create lesson plans and all of that stuff to be able to get to our educators. But there are some other things that we want to be able to do as well, and some tools that we use. And so, we've already mentioned that we are using the Civic Health Index as a tool to help with looking at how to help students become more civically engaged. But we also look at some other resources. So the Civics Now Coalition is working with all K through 12 schools who are interested in working with this coalition to really help educate and engage students in civic education. There's the Educating for American Democracy roadmap, which really provides a framework for school districts who are interested in how to teach civics and civic history in school. I'm trying to think. There is REL Center. I always forget what REL stands for, Regional Education Laboratory Central. And they essentially have released a brief that has a lot of different survey scales in how to measure civic readiness in schools. And so those are just some of the few of the resources that we're taking advantage of in order to be able to sort of create our own Nebraska survey scale that we're hoping to be able to get out to educators and teachers, just to make sure that there is some measure that we have in addition to the policies that were set out by state statute, to know if we are really graduating students who are civically ready, civically engaged.
Great, thanks for that overview. Next question is, I'm thinking that these are really great things that you're mentioning, but we also know that they don't exist in a vacuum. The education of our kids doesn't happen detached from the context of everything that's happening around us. And so I'd be interested from your perspectives of why, at least at this moment, why should community members care about the civic learning that's happening in the schools? If they don't have, you hear, well, I don't have kids in the school system anymore. How does this impact the community more generally, and what's at stake here? And so, Lori, if you'd be willing to go, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah, the community has, if the community wraps themselves around the school, and I think then the school is finds value in that. I was fortunate to live in a community and teach in that community where the school and the community really were one. And because of that, the school was successful and the community was successful. My students did Project Citizen, for instance, and they figured out, they learned to figure out what was wrong, what could be fixed. And the students working with community members were able to fix some of the problems. The kids did the research, they worked with adults, and they were able to work together on that. The kids can't figure out the problems on their own. They have to have the adults to help them think through that. And so one of the things that we're doing at ESU4 this year is we're starting a student leadership academy where we're having a middle school and a high school academy. They will come to us 4 times and during the school year, 3 middle school students, 3 high school students We're going to work with them to teach them civil discourse, but our intent is also to partner them with community members. So I think somebody mentioned the Rotary Club. That's actually, I'm going to go meet with them next week, where we will partner with Rotary members. And I want the Rotary members to be part of the teaming with those students so that they can learn from adults that are already leaders, that are already civically engaged. This is how we do it, and then bring it back to their home communities and continue to build on that. So that community is essential in order, again, for all of us to thrive, not just the communities and not just the schools, everyone together.
Great, thanks. Lacey, Elizabeth, anything to add? Why this should be important to the community as well, and or ways that you've seen that collaboration happen between the community and your classroom?
Education is an investment, and regardless if our community members have students or have kids that are in our school district, they're investing in their communities. And a lot of things that we encounter, especially in rural schools, is kids leaving and they're not coming back. And so if they want to have a vested interest in their community and they want people to stick around and even draw people to Nebraska City or to other rural areas, they have to be invested in the kids.
Great, thanks. Elizabeth, anything else to add?
A lot of what Lacey already said. I feel like a couple things, like say in our community or at play right now, every school, I think there tends to be right now this kind of us versus them. I think the pandemic has really caused that. If you think about like masking issues, right? Or new state health standards, right? There's another example that's really seemingly pitting community members against the school. And it can end up feeling like a very much us versus them. And so increasing our kids' civic involvement in an educated way, I think is a great way to reduce the possibility of that happening in the future. And I think that one of the most important reasons that people should be invested in kids' education and civic education is because who's going to live in your community in the future? And if your community is important to you, these kids are the future of it, and they need to be ready to maybe leave and come back, but come back, go to the city, experience it, get your education, but please come back. And we want this place to be a place where kids want to come back to.
And to add to what Elizabeth was saying, when we create projects and lesson plans like this, it shows community members that we're being accountable for what we're supposed to be doing in the first place. And so that way we can at least come back and say, we are trying to get our kids involved. Maybe it's you that's not paying attention. And so helping us to be accountable shows them that we're actually doing our jobs.
Thanks. This is a question, similarly to wanting to make that bridge to the next generation and to create a place where they can come back to and be invested in. We had one question come up that was a question of, do we have information or data on how everyone is involved, including Latino youth, other minorities who, at least here in Scottsbluff, are more, there's a larger population of minority, Hispanic, Latino youth in the schools than there is in the community overall, and especially represented in our institutions in leadership positions. And so what strategies, I guess, do you have, or what would you say about that education reaching all youth, and that those opportunities, I guess, are exemplified as something that all youth can see themselves in as in those, when our institutions maybe don't represent the composition of the community overall?
So I think that's very interesting. And I will say, I also think this is where we start getting into the conversations around the nuances of words, right? And so right now, the word equity has been thrown around, but it's been thrown around as if it is, a dirty word, right? But when we're talking about equality versus equity and it comes to education, this is a prime example where equity really fits the bill, right? What are we doing to make sure marginalized populations are really receiving the outreach and the services that they need to ensure that they're going to be civically engaged students, especially when we're talking about, for instance, English language learners, right? It's not that language learners, as they get older, don't want to be active and participant members in society. However, if everything's in a language that is not native to their own, if everything is not communicated or conveyed in a way that they understand, which would be their native language, then there is no motivation for students to participate in the community as they grow older. And so when we bring in equitable resources to make sure that the outreach is actionable and it will produce results, then we start getting to what we're looking for, right? We start getting to having students participate. We start looking at having them encouraging others to be participants in our community as well. And so I think we need to start looking at ways to make sure that we are reaching out to, all community members.
Thanks. Anything else to add from our other panelists? Okay. Well, great. Thanks, Ebony. Next question. Civic health broadly covers social connectedness, community engagement, political involvement. I'm curious where you think that we are right now best preparing our students to build connection in their community, to be good neighbors, to be engaged politically and be civically active, and where you think maybe we have the most work to do through new innovations. I'm going to go to Lacey or Elizabeth. Would you like to start out? Where do you think we're best preparing students, and where do you think we have the most work to do as far as civic health goes?
Go ahead, Lace, and then I'll piggyback off of what you say.
Need to unmute Lacey.
Sorry.
We have to have at least one every meeting, so.
I really do think that a lot of our students are willing to participate in civics. I just don't think they really know where to start. And obviously school is where, they learn a lot of those skills. But I think with the emergence of all of these social media apps, their information is also flawed. And so they get this information that might not always be true and they want to run with it, but they don't know how to argue their opinions either. And so to add to that, a lot of our seniors, so since I teach juniors American government, I don't get the opportunity to actually get them to register to vote, but I always go through and show them how to do it. And so the next year, a lot of our seniors, they're doing it on their own. And I think that's one part of civics that, we don't necessarily want to pressure them. We want them to participate. We voluntarily, and I think that there is an interest in getting involved locally within our community. It's just, like I said, they just don't know where to start. And going off of what Lori said at the very beginning, they need adults to help them identify problems. And then they're the ones who really get at trying to find the solutions.
I'm going to speak to that just a little bit. I agree that kids are, because they have social media, because they have their phone, they're very connected to all kinds of perspectives and points of view. And I really think it's grown their world quite a bit. I mean, I have a teenager, right? And the things that she knows about, the things that she sees, like the plight of a certain group of people. She sees that so much more readily, right? But they don't know how to talk about it in a civil way. Lacey can speak to masking conversations. I can speak to a horrible experience with masking conversations and what your rights are and things like that. So they're also tearing each other apart. I mean, we had kids doing horrible things to each other, saying, writing notes, all in this political environment because they haven't been taught how to argue in a productive way. Lacey talked about where to start. And I think, I don't know what the numbers are exactly, but I feel like in our community that our numbers of group organization. So I liked that you had that chart that said we're in a lot of organizations, right? People are a part of Kiwanis or Rotary, but I'm assuming that that's adults. So what are kids still involved with? I think people not regularly attending places of faith has broken up a community or broken up a part of a community inside of our community, right? So maybe if you were part of a church, then you had this opportunity to be civically engaged through a faith lens, or if you were in Scouts, or, what are those opportunities that we're offering our kids where they're a part of a group involved within their community? And if they're not, if you're not in Scouts, then how do you know where to go and pick up trash, right? Or whatever the case might be. Few thoughts.
Can I add? Sorry, Ebony. Go
ahead, Lori.
So one of the things that we implemented a number of years ago at Johnson Brock, where I was at, is we had required community service hours. I actually did my master's thesis on that, whether or not requiring students to do community service was of value. I assumed that by making it a requirement, it was actually a bad thing and kids would be resentful of it, not want to do it. It was opposite. What we did is we required 5 hours for freshmen, 10 hours for sophomores, 15 for juniors, 20 for seniors. I really expected that to backfire. It has been embedded. And when I talk about the strength of the community and the school, by requiring that, and it has to be meaningful. It can't just be, I'm going to go, help my grandma or something. I mean, it has to be pre-approved. There's a whole process to do it. There's a reflection following it. I left there 4 years ago. They're still doing it. That's part, I think, of strengthening that community bond, because the community says we're hosting, whatever organization, the firemen are hosting a pancake feed. We need somebody to help us do this. And so suddenly those kids that maybe don't have an opportunity because maybe their parents aren't part of the firemen, now they're active and they're seeing opportunities in the adult world and the community world, and the community is getting to know these kids and realizing not every kid is some kind of punk, because there is that attitude out there by some adults. And so even as simple as just requiring community service hours by a school might change philosophy. Again, it can't be done willy-nilly. It has to be done intentional, but I think it can be powerful.
And I was just going to speak very quickly to this ability for those of us in education to really draw the lines and make it clear between engagement and connectedness, right? So we do a great job of teaching our students how to be engaged, right? We tell them they can vote. We tell them that they can contact or write an elected official. We tell them that they can show up to public body meetings. Like, we give them all these examples of how they can be engaged, but I don't know if we necessarily do a great job about showing why engagement is important to the connectedness of the community. And so an example that I'll give is we talk to students about how it should be their duty, right, to serve on a jury. But why is serving on a jury important, right? It's because a jury is determined by your peers. And so if, in a city like Omaha, for instance, happens if the large majority of the people who are involved in the legal system are from marginalized populations, but we're not making it clear that, you know, the jury is actually just going to be of not necessarily your peers. I think it then becomes important to show and explain why it is important to register to vote, because that means then you have the ability to serve on a jury, and it means that then you have the ability to, you know, actually be a member and participate in, you know, I guess criminal cases or however. But I guess my overall point is just to say, like, yes, we tell them how to participate, but we actually don't explain to students the importance of why that participation is important for the connectedness of a community. Even if it's, you know, we've used the example a couple of times, picking up trash. Well, your community is better. And if your community looks better, you know, it contributes to a rise in housing prices, which, you know, again, benefits the education system. Like, there are cyclical reasons and, you know, why we should be kind of drawing those clear lines for our students.
Great, thanks a lot. Thanks everyone. And I think this also is bringing to mind the importance of us as community members to step in to form partnerships with educators to in the youth that we're also involved in, to make those examples clear as well. So appreciate y'all bringing that up. I'm going to pass it over to Nancy. She's been keeping track of some questions in the chat, and we have probably about 5 minutes to field some questions. So not as much time as we had hoped, but we'll get some questions from the field answered here.
Yeah, thanks everyone for having this really thoughtful discussion. So it looks like we do have one question in the chat from Roger. So I'll just kind of pose this to our panelists, and whoever wants to take a stab at it, go for it. Are school administrations in Nebraska doing enough to reach out to and understand community opinions and thoughts before introducing and enacting new policies? So if anyone can speak to that, maybe what the process looks like for engaging community members and groups before moving forward on policy.
I believe that school boards are really what the superintendents count on to get that feel. Our school boards are varied in sizes and who represents them, but that is mostly. Now, a lot of a lot of superintendents may attend different meetings as well to get that insight, but I'm certain that they're listening closely to their board members.
So there is some hesitation in how I want to answer this question. And I will say that I think part of the issue is that school administrators become so bogged down in, you know, the day-to-day of running a school that I don't know if they necessarily have the ability to really leverage the opinions of stakeholders and community members before they start making policy. So I agree with Lori in the sense that they rely very heavily on the school board to be able to make some of those decisions. I think the other side of it is it's also kind of left to the teachers in the classroom to sort of bridge that gap between the community and the classroom. And I don't know. In some ways, yes, I think by, you know, the very nature of social studies educators, that in some ways we take that ownership and responsibility on ourselves, but I don't know if it's necessarily it should be the responsibility of, you know, teachers to bridge that gap as well. So yeah.
Well said. Oh yeah, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Oh, sorry, I don't have a lot. I just would say that, Lito, I've been teaching for a long time, and I would say that currently, at least currently, my administration has been doing, I believe, a much better job at reaching out to stakeholders and asking them to be a part of all kinds of different processes. we, a couple of years ago, worked on our mission statement, and there were teachers and parents and community members a part of that team, and I thought it was very, very beneficial. A lot of surveys are going out and asking the opinions. We just had a survey for Esther's money. What do you think? What are your opinions? Where do you think some of this money should go, right? And that might have just been required. I have no idea, but I do worry about how that's getting out. It concerns me just a little bit that it has happened where I've had to double check and say, hey, where is this in Spanish? Or yes, it's online, and I understand like saving paper, but how do we reach those families that are maybe not on our Facebook page, or set up? How do we convince them that it's important for them to be connected digitally? Because they're probably connected digitally to a lot of things, but how do we stress to them that it's important for them to be digitally connected to the school so that we can reach out to them and have their voice heard?
Anything you wanted to add, Lacey?
Sorry, no, pretty much everything that Elizabeth, considering that we teach in the same school district, she nailed it. It was spot on with some of the issues that we're seeing. Is it's a two-way street. We, yes, need to get our students more involved, but at the same time, adults and community members need to listen, and they need to be active in what we're actually doing.
Absolutely.
Yes, Lacey, I just want to commend you for saying that. I think we don't give enough credit to the voices of our students. And we always, we know how we felt when we were teenagers to, feel like we were not being listened to and dismissed, and that our opinions were not validated. And I think as we grow into adults, we need to remember that and do a better job of just really listening to our students and the things that they're asking for and want to see.
Yeah, I think there's a meme out there about, adults criticizing young kids for not getting involved. And then when they do, their opinion doesn't matter. And so I think that it's kids see that. And I feel like that's a huge reason why a lot of kids feel like, well, it doesn't matter what I say or do, because they don't listen to us anyway. And so, like I said before, adults need to come and reach us halfway so that they can see that we are actually getting involved and the kids actually know their stuff. And so, in fact, I think with this Nat Geo project, kids are going to know a lot more than adults do.
Awesome.
Yes.
Well, we're right at 12:59. Daniel, I'm going to give it back over to you to wrap things up for us.
Okay, thanks a lot. Yeah, thanks for joining us today. I'm just going to quickly share as we wrap this up. Are you seeing a blank screen or are you seeing a presentation?
Presentation.
Great. Well, just as a reminder, we also always want to put in a plug for our Capital Experiences days, which are hosted in person and online. We took it all virtual over the last year. So those are available for people who are farther away from Lincoln. Also, I have to admit, Kent Day, my coworker, is the best person to share about this. He's developed some new curriculum and resources that are based on the 4 indicators of civic health and tailored to 4 grade bands, forming a more perfect union. So I know there's a lot of interactive stuff, and there's a lot of resources that links to Common Sense Media and some really great places, but he would be the best one to give information about that. So his name's Kent Day. I don't know, maybe Nancy, if you can drop his email in the chat, maybe that'd be great. So that also is a resource. We're going to continue these on a monthly or as close to monthly basis as we can manage. There's also a community self-assessment discussion guide that is great for probably higher level classrooms, but also for community members. And we really do know that this is something that all of us are involved in. So thanks to our educators who joined us. Thanks to our panelists for your insights today. And please get in touch with us if there's any way that we can collaborate and in bridging, community to educators to youth. It's all, we're all in this together. So thanks a lot, everybody. And thanks for joining us today.